Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Before I introduce our first speaker, I wanted to recognize all the teachers in the room, those of you who are in classrooms every single day with students. As you probably know, this is National Teacher Appreciation Week, so please join me in thanking them for all the work that they do to nurture and inspire young people. You have one of the most challenging jobs around. So my name is Vivian Mahalagas, and I'm a senior fellow at the Institute for Learning, and it is my sincere pleasure to introduce you to Lee Gutkind. I just learned last night that for years I've been saying his name wrong, and now I'm like, is it Gutkind? All right. There's so much to say about Lee, but I've decided to narrow it down to the top 6 most interesting and cool things about Lee. Lee was proclaimed by Vanity Fair magazine as the godfather behind creative nonfiction. I know. You could call him the Godfather if you can't remember how to pronounce his name. In recent years, creative nonfiction, also commonly known as narrative nonfiction or literary nonfiction, has become an important genre to read and write in both English language arts and science classes. Number 5, Lee is the founder and editor of Creative Nonfiction Magazine, the first and largest literary magazine to publish creative nonfiction exclusively. And he was kind enough to provide everyone with a copy of Creative Nonfiction Magazine, which you can pick up in the back of the room, but not right now. He also founded the first creative nonfiction program in the world at the University of Pittsburgh. Lee is the author and editor of more than 30 books. They range from books that help people write creative nonfiction. One of his most popular ones is called You Can't Make This Stuff Up, and it's been compared to Stephen King's popular handbook on writing. He's also edited lots of collections of creative nonfiction about different topics, such as becoming a nurse, becoming a doctor, true crime, baseball, and my favorite title, Southern Sin, True Stories of the Sultry South and Women Behaving Badly. One of his upcoming collections is called Becoming a Teacher. In addition to editing collections, Lee is a prolific author. His books cover many aspects of technology and healthcare, including robotics, organ transplantation, child and adolescent mental health, and personalized medicine. Lee has lectured to audiences around the world, from China to the Czech Republic, from Australia to Africa to Egypt. Most recently, Lee presented workshops in DC at the National Press Club and the National Academy of Sciences. Next week, he'll be keynoting the annual meeting on the Council of Healthcare Economics and Policy at Princeton University. These engagements, as well as his appointment as a distinguished writer in residence at a science policy think tank at Arizona State University, represent the acknowledgement that we need to learn how to tell true stories that communicate information about science, technology, and policy to the general public, the very audience that innovation and complicated ideas will impact. Number 2 on my list of 6, in addition to being a distinguished writer in residence at a science policy think tank, Lee is also a professor in the Hugh Downs School of Human Communication at Arizona State University. And finally, Lee has appeared on many national radio and television shows, including The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and you should watch it. He's held his own. You know, Jon Stewart can take down a person. Lee was awesome on Jon Stewart. Also on Good Morning America, National Public Radio's Talk of the Nation and All Things Considered, as well as BBC World. In addition to all of Lee's professional accolades, he's also a great conversationalist and stellar human being. Please welcome me, join me in welcoming Lee.
Am I on?
You're on. Oh, I mean, you're on.
I'm on, there, yes. So gee whiz, nice to see you guys. Nice to be here. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Tony, for inviting me. Thank you, Vivian, for almost correctly pronouncing my last name. And Tony is an old friend. For 30 years, I've been trying to get him to say Gutkind instead of Gutkind, and we're halfway there. So this is nice, and I feel. I'm going to talk to you about structure. Vivian called this patterns of writing. I'm going to talk to you about that, and structure is really important. And I'm not really talking about diagramming sentences. I'm talking about how you put together pieces of hard-hitting, informative, interesting nonfiction narrative. But you know, I really feel, because Tony and Vivian are here, and because I like you guys, and because I'm here in Baltimore, I feel so close to you. I feel like I need to kind of confide a little bit in you. I mean, those of you who dragged me away from the bar last night at 4 a.m. Understand my addiction to red wine, to vodka, and no exaggeration, third venti of the morning. And I haven't even told you about how I feel about potato chips. I just cannot resist potato chips. But there's something else that happens to me that in the middle of the night that I have to share with you. It happened last night. It happens almost every night. It's this. I cannot tell you, I am addicted. I am obsessed by Law and Order in the middle of the night. Only once last night. That's because I was at the bar till 4 a.m. But only once last night did I do Law and Order, okay? But sometimes it's 2 or 3 or 4 times. And you know, I'm not the only person so obsessed by Law and Order. Law and Order is all over the world. You can get Law and Order in the middle of the night in almost any country on TV, okay? The original Law and Order was on primetime television for 23 years. I got to get off the stage here. I'm also a writer of creative nonfiction, and that's my magazine, Telling Stories That Matter. And you'll see how narrative is illuminating tough subjects from capital punishment to science policy. And this is what we do. Doctors, scientists, economists, lots of people are writing creative nonfiction, using creative nonfiction techniques to communicate ideas and to a general audience and to write bestsellers. Creative nonfiction is the most popular right now genre in the publishing industry, in the literary community, and also in the academy. Creative nonfiction means true stories well told. It really does mean communicating very difficult information to a general audience through story. And this is becoming increasingly important these days, as you know, because the world is becoming crazily complicated. Genomics, robotics, computer science. There's so much for us to learn. And the fact of the matter is that the people who know all this stuff, who make all this stuff up, who create these ideas, who invent these technologies are often unable, or in fact, alas, unwilling to communicate what they know and what they do to a larger general audience. The people who will be impacted by their brilliant ideas. So writing, teaching, publishing, editing, creative nonfiction has been my mission in life for a long, long time. Okay, so what does this all have to do with Law and Order? And you saw in one of the slides, what is this yellow test that was on one of the slides? Is it some sort of forensic technique? Well, maybe. Let's kind of look at Law and Order. Why is it so successful? How does Law and Order begin? You know how it begins. It begins with a scene, right? There's a policeman eating a donut, right? There's a woman walking her dog. And then suddenly something happens. Something really surprising, right? Shots are fired. And then a body is discovered. And then what happens next? Another scene, right? Another scene. Logan and Briscoe. Logan and Briscoe arrive at the scene of the crime. They interview the bystanders, they police the perimeter, and then almost always Lenny Briscoe, the veteran detective, has to say, yeah, you're nodding your head, you're with me in the middle of the night, I know. Lenny Briscoe has some sort of clever remark, right? Then what happens? You guys know what happens, right? Yeah! Then what happens after that? After that, commercials, right? All kinds of commercials, on and on. And then, after all these commercials, another scene, right? The detectives are now back at headquarters, caucusing with their lieutenant, Anita Van Buren. And then they make a plan. Another scene, they arrest a suspect, right? And then, what happens after that? We know what happens after that. There are more commercials, right? Okay, so we're beginning to see some sort of pattern, some sort of formula, some sort of what we like to call creative nonfiction jazz. First, there's a scene. Then there's a commercial. Then there's a scene. Then there's commercial. Scene, commercial, scene, commercial. Now, we writers do the same thing. We just kind of make it sound a little bit different, maybe a little bit more literary and academic. First, there's a story. Then there's information. Then there's a story. Then there's information. Story, information, story, information. That's kind of the creative nonfiction rhythm. That's the pattern. That's the pattern I'm going to talk with you about today. And so, the people who sponsor the commercials, the advertisers, they also understand this story, information pattern, you know? They're not dumb, and they're smart, and they got lots of money, and so they design their commercials in the same exact pattern or way. So just think about this. Think about a bunch of young parents contemplating their future.
So has anybody actually started saving for college yet?
Oh, not me.
No, you got time.
Oh, no, we actually started.
Yeah, but how did you even know where to start?
Oh, I found out about the Gerber Life College plan.
So here is a story with a problem, okay? And that's what always happens in the way in which we design our creative nonfiction patterns. Story with the problem, and then information.
Call now and get started with free information on the Gerber Life College plan.
Oh, it's a life insurance policy too.
Oh, that's different.
By the way, this commercial is 10 years old. It has been so incredibly successful. And so one more thing, story with a problem, then information, and then sometimes we have to nudge our readers, kind of tell them what to do, right? So
We've got to get started.
So here is an even more ubiquitous, more successful commercial that you guys will recognize. I think people would recognize this commercial even more than they would recognize Law and Order. So here it is, but I got to confess, it's a little campy.
I've fallen, and I can't get up.
We're sending help immediately, Mrs. Fletcher.
Okay, story with a serious problem, right? There is really something at stake here. Poor Mrs. Fletcher, my God, what's going to happen? This is what's going to happen. She's going to have some help.
Recently, when I
But
became
information
deathly
first.
ill, I was able to summon an ambulance, my next-door neighbor, my family, and my doctor without picking up a telephone. I used this remote control to contact Life Call, my 24-hour emergency medical response service.
So, story with the problem, information, more story, okay? And it's just not people with commercials. Big corporations are seeing the value and importance of story. Coca-Cola has a website with 4 full-time employees just devoted to gathering and writing and editing and publishing stories favorable to their product. And of course, there can't be an election, whether it's local or national, No candidate can get away these days without having his or her own story or narrative, right? Okay, so this guy would not be president of the United States if it wasn't for this book that was published long before he became an international figure. By the way, it's a brilliant book, and he sold of creative nonfiction, and he has sold millions of copies. So, whoops, I'm going to go back just for a second. I'm going to try to go back. There we go. We are absolutely, positively obsessed by story. The brain is wired for story, okay? Now, what I just showed you, and I want to show you again, is a black and white film that was done in 1945 by a professor at the University of Kansas who showed this film to 41 of his graduate students and asked them to write down what they saw. About half of the students wrote down they saw the two triangles as men vying for the attention of the circle, who was the woman. About the other half of the group wrote down voluntarily, spontaneously, that actually the circle and the small triangle were naive, immature young things, being chased and intimidated by the mean, evil, bigger triangle. Only one person of that group of graduate students wrote down what the professor had hoped they would write down, which was, it's a couple triangles and a circle going back and forth across the screen. Now, lately, we've been doing lots more very interesting research about the power and the influence of narrative, right? So it's absolutely proven again and again by many tests and many studies that people remember more facts for a longer period of time when they're communicated with a story. And people are much more easily persuaded when a story is told to them. Take a look at the op-ed pages of, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post. Used to be there were these editorials telling us what to think. Well, we may not be thinking any better these days than anybody else, but we don't want to be told what to think anymore. And so you have to write a story, a true story, obviously. You write a true story, and you make sure the story leads the reader to your conclusion. You will push them. You will bend them. You will manipulate them. That's what we writers are. We are manipulators sometimes through story, okay? And that's how we persuade people. You know, another study also showed, a couple studies, that when people are asked to write their own life histories, long ago they would begin by saying, well, I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, blah, 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 and they would start from scratch there. These days, people are much more cinematic, and they write their life stories almost as if they're writing chapters in a novel. So they'll say, the first thing I really remember is that day when I was 9 years old, and my dad and my mom were looking grim and worried, and we sat down at the dinner table, and that's when they told me that they were getting divorced. That's their memory. And then they might go back in time and talk about where they were born and raised and the house that they lived in, but it's all like novels, chapters in a novel. So I want to go back to structure now. I want to tell you how we do this. I like to kind of look at my work, and I try to get my students to look at our work almost as if, we look at our work because we're great writers and it feels really good to write. But I also want you to understand how it comes together. I want people writers to understand, to kind of look at their work almost as if they're architects looking at the blueprint of a bridge. And so we're going to kind of take apart and we're going to talk about structure a little bit. So I want you to remember that a creative nonfiction story is a balancing act between story and substance, style and substance. You got to kind of get the right measure of them both at the same time. And this is what you tell your students. Okay, and this is what I want you to remember. Please don't think. Never think. Or, more specifically, don't think too much about the point that you want to make. Of course, you know what point you want to make. But don't run into it quickly as a writer. Think one more thing. Think one more thing. Think how you're going to get to the reader. Remember, this is so important. We are not writing for ourselves. We are certainly not writing to make a lot of money. We are not writing for fame and fortune. We are writing to communicate and impact somebody else. So the point you want to make is irrelevant to the reader at that particular moment. So what do? What you do is, what's the story that will lead to that point? You'll get to the point. You'll make an impact. You'll connect with your reader. But remember, the story will get you there. So, let's see what I wanted. Yes, so think story, think cinema. Remember this, that the building blocks of good narrative nonfiction are scenes, little stories. We're talking about little stories and how they come together, how you make them work cinematically, how they are three-dimensional, and how you can communicate those ideas through this three dimension. Okay? Now I'm talking to you about, it's easy for me to talk to you about this. I know that. It's easy to say, but it's really, really hard to do. It's hard to achieve that, hard to get students to work hard enough to make these blocks of scenes. And so I now want to introduce to you what I consider to be the creative nonfiction writer's most important writing tool, the yellow magic marker. Now, in the past, I know, in college, you had these yellow magic markers and you yellowed in the facts. Well, I don't want you to do that. Well, if you want to do that, pick another color. What I want you to do is think about the yellow test. What is the yellow test? So I want you to get, when you write, or get your students to write, or get your teachers to write, when you write, sit down, listen to everything I say. Don't waver from anything I say, because I am the Godfather, right? Listen to what I say and write the best you can. And after the first or second or third draft, print it out, take a look at it, and then say to yourself, have I done this story information, scene to scene to scene formula that Lee told me about? And the way you figure out whether you've done it or not is literally take that yellow magic marker and yellow in the scenes. And if your work kind of follows that guideline, if you know you're being cinematic, if you have this balance we've been talking about, then that paper should be glaring and blaring back at you in many respects in yellow, because the building blocks of good narrative, communicative nonfiction is story, little scenes. Now, if you want to kind of look at this a little in a broader scope, remember, we're looking at blueprints, we're looking at structure. Here's a little grid that you can kind of think about. Remember what we do. First, there's a scene, a story with a problem, and we get our readers. That first scene is really important. We're going to talk a little bit more about the first scene in a few minutes, but the first scene is really important. You get your readers involved, just like Law and Order, and when you got them, you give them a commercial. That is to say, you give them, remember, story information, story information, story information. You just give them a little bit more information, and then think about your reader. The reader's going to get bored. The reader wants to learn, but the reader really doesn't want to learn that much. And the fact of the matter is, you probably want to teach the reader something he or she doesn't want to learn. Okay, so what we're doing is kind of using story to communicate information. So story, information, all the way down the line. And you will see, as the longer the piece, that the fewer times you need these blocks of information, you can go from story to story to story. Now, so I'm not telling you to sit down and think about this as you write. I'm telling you to just generally think about this pattern and write, and then when you have something written, look at it and see how close or far away you are from the pattern, okay? And I'm also telling you that you are, as a writer, you are sorry to use this word, but you are a manipulator. You are attempting to make an impact, to send a message, to get a reader to think something, to do something, to be something, right? And so you're doing everything you possibly can. You are channeling that reader, okay? You're connecting with that reader with your writing. And so not only do you want to follow this pattern, but you want to also sneak in information inside your scenes, okay? You embed information inside your scenes. So story information, and information inside of story whenever possible. Now I told you that's the first. The first scene is really important because it establishes the problem, what I like to call the what's at stake situation, which promises the reader so much more. Okay? So listen, this is from Cheryl Strayed's best-selling creative nonfiction book about her hike through the Pacific Coast Trail. It was made into a movie, as you well know. Some of you have seen it, and nominated for an Academy Award. The trees were tall, but I was taller, standing above them on a steep mountain slope in Northern California. Moments before, I'd removed my hiking boots, and the left one had fallen into those trees. First, catapulting into the air when my enormous backpack toppled onto it, then skittering across the gravelly trail and flying over the edge. It bounced off of a rocky outcropping several feet beneath me before disappearing into the forest canopy below. Impossible to retrieve. I let out a stunned gasp, though I'd been in the wilderness 38 days, and by then I'd come to know that anything could happen, and that everything would. But that doesn't mean I wasn't shocked when it did. My boot was gone. Actually gone. Story with a big problem. And guess what? I don't know how many of you people read this book, but I'll tell you, we don't find out how Cheryl actually made it boot-wise, foot-wise, through the rest of her 4 months on the Pacific Coast Trail until the middle of the book. Because that's what we do. Story with a problem. And then we never, you guys never, ever tell a reader what he or she wants to know until you are ready to get rid of them. Okay? You tell a reader what you make a reader want to know something. And then you tell them what you want to tell them. And you keep stringing them along, promising they'll find out something. Once you tell them, they go and buy a pizza. They're out. Okay? So here's another. And I'm going to take this apart for you a little bit. This is even a bigger best-selling nonfiction book, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. And I'm going to kind of deconstruct this scene for you. First sentence of the book. I was sitting in a taxi, wondering if I had overdressed for the evening, when I looked out the window and I saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. Isn't that a great sentence? I mean, really, how could you not at least go to the next sentence? Because she's in a taxi, she's overdressed, and her poor mother is rooting through a dumpster. What's going on? So we got this action. We got something at stake. We got the problem, okay? But we don't tell the answer, do we? Then we have the opportunity for setting. There's always a setting. It was just after dark. A blustery March wind whipped through the steam coming out of the manholes, and people hurried along the sidewalks with their collars turned up. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading. Okay? Setting. Or any other kind of information you want to give. Then, back to the action. Remember, now I'm deconstructing a scene, but before I deconstructed an essay or a book, it's all the same pattern. Mom stood 15 feet away. She had tied rags around her shoulders to keep out the spring chill and was picking through the trash while her dog, a black and white terrier mix, played at her feet. Action. Then, background, description with specific details. Mom's gestures were all familiar, the way she tilted her head and thrust out her lower lip when studying items of potential value that she'd hoisted out of the dumpster. The way her eyes widened. Look at the way Jeanette gives picture after picture, what we call flash descriptions. way her eyes widened with childish glee when she found something she liked. Her long hair was streaked with gray, tangled and matted, and her eyes had sunk deep into their sockets, but still, she reminded me of the mom she'd been when I was a kid, swan diving off cliffs and painting in the desert and reading Shakespeare aloud. Her cheekbones were still high and strong, but the skin was parched and ruddy from all those winters and summers exposed to the elements. More background, more information. So, finally, in the end, to the people walking by, she probably looked like any of the thousands of homeless people in New York City. It had been months since I laid eyes on Mom, and when she looked up, I was overcome with panic that she'd see me, and she'd call out my name, and that someone on the way to the same party would spot us together, and Mom would introduce herself, and my secret would be out. A scene, a block of yellow. Cinema. What's at stake? Why is she in this taxi? Why is Mom in the dumpster? Oh, the reader's dying to know, right? The reader doesn't know. That's the first scene in the book. For those of you who read the book, you will know that we don't find out why Mom is in the dumpster until the last chapter of the book, right? Because we don't want to satisfy our readers. We want to string them along and tell them what we want to tell them. It's the way it is. It's the way it is. So, elements of a scene. Okay, there's always action. There's always dialogue, right? People are always talking to other people, and when you have dialogue, of course, then you can describe people, how they reach, how they look. So you can make it three-dimensional by just using dialogue. And of course, I talked to you a little bit about description. I don't really go around doing this when I write, but I do look at all aspects of what people look like, what they're wearing, and I look for ways to describe people, what I like to call flash descriptions. I like to kind of find 4 or 5 words, some sort of specific detail that nails the people that we're talking about. So this comes from Race in America, won by Kevin Sack. It won the Pulitzer Prize. Robert Lawson, a soulful tenor with a fondness for canary yellow suits. Reuben Birch, a 6'7" black man whose blue usher's blazer is a tad short in the sleeves. Okay, just something that is really distinctive about the person that will nail the person without you having to go through 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs of description. Madge Mayo, the spry 85-year-old widow, stands 4'9" and keeps her luminescent white hair in a tight bun. Good, specific detail. Okay, so setting, there's always a setting. I will move past that because I'm running short of time. And then what I like to get my students to do, and what I do myself also, is that, did I mention this before? I don't know if I mentioned this. The building blocks of creative nonfiction are scenes. Did I mention that? Did I say that? Yeah, okay. So if I said that, I want you to remember that, okay? And so when I interview people, I don't necessarily interview them for information. I mean, we can Google 90% of the information we need, okay? So I interview them for story. And so I take interviews and I transpose them into scenes. I make the people, my interviewee, work for me so I don't have to work so hard on my own scenes, okay? I do want to talk to you about inner point of view since it's so much fun. So inner point of view, this is kind of another stretch, something we do, something we can do as creative nonfiction writers. We break barriers. We do things that fiction writers have been doing, use literary techniques for years, except, of course, we're telling the truth. We're being as factual as we possibly can. We're not making stuff up, okay? So if you really want to make a connection with your reader, the inner point of view technique is when you look at the world through the eyes of the people you are writing about, rather than from the outside objective observer. So this comes from In Cold Blood. Truman Capote. It's a brilliant book, as most of you know. He interviewed 400 people who had anything to do with the killing in Kansas in the middle 1960s, and he wrote this book. But he really got inside the heads of his characters. So this is inner point of view. We're seeing the world through the eyes of our characters. Dick heard the grim vibrations of an oncoming, not yet visible car. Perry heard it too. He put the harmonica in his pocket and he joined Dick at the side of the road. They watched. Now the car appeared and grew until it became a blue Dodge sedan with a single passenger, a bald, skinny man. Perfect. Dick raised his hand and waved. By the way, they're planning to kill this guy. Dick raised his hand and waved. The Dodge slowed down, and Dick gave the man a sumptuous smile. The car almost, but not quite, came to a stop, and the driver leaned out the window, looking them up and down. The impression they made was evidently alarming. The car leaped forward and sped on. Dick cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "You're a lucky bastard!" So we see the world through Dick, through Perry, and if you look at this example, we even see the world through the guy driving in the car, just for a second. It's called inner point of view. We're pushing the nonfiction envelope, but if we interview our people carefully enough, we know what they see and we know what they think. So it's a technique that I think is really cool. So I've said this to you before. I'm going to say it to you again. One thing I have learned is if I teach freshmen, I say the same thing to them as when I teach PhD students. This formula is the formula. This is the it. The writing is the writing. The construction is the construction. We can move around a little bit, but achieving this pattern is what most writers and all writers, fiction writers, poets, playwrights try to do, this story information pattern. So scenes. Your scenes will lead a reader into what you want them to think about. Here's one more piece, and it's a much more scientific piece. And this first paragraph is really terrific because it gives the setting, the situation, the action, the what's at stake, all in one paragraph. In 1988, John Brunston bought a house in Yorktown Heights, a suburb of New York City. His wife decorated bedrooms for their three daughters, and Brunston planted a cherry tree and an American flag. Nice, specific details. Then came the spring rains, and Brunston discovered a dark fountain of human waste bubbling up from his backyard. He did everything he could to stop the sickening flow. He consulted engineers, installed a new septic tank, purchased sump pumps, dumped ton after ton of fresh soil over the ooze. He spent tens of thousands of dollars, but the evil smelling gloop still percolated to the surface. Setting, situation, what's at stake, all in one beautiful, wonderful paragraph. This was from Harper's Magazine. Then, just like we talked about before, after that, there's information. And then, I'll just skip to the end. But neither John Brunston nor anyone else on this lovely block of Yorktown Heights can hook up to a sewer because the sewers of Yorktown Heights are already full. In fact, they are running at 100,000 gallons of waste per day beyond capacity, so Brunston's backyard must absorb Brunston's waste. And then back to the action and to one at stake factor, one sentence, and it cannot. So this is serious for John Brunston, okay? And then what happens after that? We have the scene, we have the situation, we have the problem at stake. Poor Brunston and his house and his sewage. And so after that, it leads us to the substance of the essay. Every day, America must find a place to park 5 billion gallons of human waste, and our country appears increasingly unable to find the space. Not surprisingly, the effects have been dramatic. So if you're a creative nonfiction writer, you will do exactly what I just showed you we would do. If you're a traditional nonfiction writer, that's probably how you would start. Okay? Just kind of get up to the problem and talk about the problem. We're using the story to get to the problem. Okay? here is some of my best advice to you in this particular situation. Not only when you do should you do the yellow test after you write the best you can. This is almost everything I am saying to you has to do with after you write the best you can. You just write, thinking what you know about the subject and what you know about writing. You write. This is the thing that writers do. Ernest Hemingway bragged that, Ernest Hemingway, remember this guy? They didn't have computers at the time. This is shocking news. So he used what they call, you're so young and beautiful, you've never heard of typewriters, right? Typewriters? But he had a typewriter, and he wrote the last draft of Farewell to Arms 39 times on the typewriter until it was right. And he said it wasn't quite right, but it was the best he could do. He gave up after 39 times, okay? So you sit down and you write, you type it out, or you do whatever you want to do with it, and then you look at it like the surgeon. You write like an artist. You write like a scholar. You write the best you can, and then you look at it like a surgeon, and or an architect. You take it apart. So if you're starting with background in the back, you got a problem. Okay? Maybe you are so incredibly brilliant putting words together that it doesn't really matter. Okay? Because your words just connect to the reader and they're compelled. All they want to do is to know what you think and what you feel. That doesn't happen that often. Okay? So remember, background in the back. Remember, people ask me this all the time. How do I know what kind of information I should put in this essay or this book? When do I stop? Well, the whole idea is that the story you choose determines the information you provide. The person, the reader, is reading the story. Maybe you will get the reader interested in mathematics or in whatever subject you care to communicate. But the reader begins reading because he or she likes the story. And so the story will tell you what the reader needs to know in order to understand the story. And if you have other things you want to tell the reader that won't connect to the story, then you have to figure out how you're going to alter the story or tell a different story. The story determines the information you provide. Now let me see what time it is, because Hemingway's on my mind. And all right, so I'm going to have to stop soon. But how could I not tell you about Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald and revision, okay? I got to tell you about that. Look, so Hemingway, this guy, wrote this book called The Sun Also Rises, his first really successful published novel. And he prided himself about what a great reviser and rewriter. Well, I just told you 39 times, Farewell to Arms, last chapter. He was so pleased with himself. He would revise and rewrite constantly, okay? So after he wrote The Sun Also Rises, he sent it to probably the most famous editor in the world of literature, a guy named Maxwell Perkins, who was not only Hemingway's editor, but was Thomas Wolfe's editor, and F. Scott Fitzgerald's editor, Gertrude Stein's editor. Max Perkins was hot. And he was really terrific. And Hemingway sent The Sun Also Rises after he revised and he revised and he revised. He sent The Sun Also Rises to Max Perkins, and Max said, "You're ready. Let's publish." But Hemingway also sent manuscripts to some of his best friends. And everybody wrote back and said, "This is really terrific. This is really wonderful. I love this work. Go for it. This is going to be a big deal book." But Hemingway did not hear from F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I don't know if you've read anything about Hemingway, but the way he drank, worse than 4 o'clock at this bar yesterday. It was just terrible the way he drank, and he had a bad temper, and he was really angry at Fitzgerald because Fitzgerald was ignoring him. So after about 6 weeks, he called up Fitzgerald and he said, "What is going on? I sent you my book. I want to publish it, and now you're not answering me. What's happening?" Fitzgerald paused for a bit and then said, I don't know what he called him, then said, "Papa," then said, "Ernest," whatever. "I got to tell you, there's something wrong with this book. I am bored with your first 4 chapters. Your first 4 chapters are kind of background. You don't really need these first 4 chapters. Here's what I think. I think you should start with your first chapter in the book should be your 5th chapter. That's what I think. And so Hemingway looked at it and talked to Max Perkins, and then he agreed. He finally agreed with Fitzgerald. So if you go to the Barnes & Noble bookstore down the street, it's not too far from here, and you buy a copy of The Sun Also Rises, it will actually, the first chapter will actually be the 5th chapter of what Hemingway thought was his final manuscript, okay? Because so often when we revise, the first lead is not necessarily the real lead. And so we put it all together, and then we look at it all together as a package from beginning to end. And often the first lead is gone. It can be your ending. A lot of the information that Hemingway had in his 4 chapters were embedded later in the book, okay? First lead, real lead. So, what else do I want to say here? So, just quite quickly, there's always a frame and there's always a focus. A frame means what is the larger story that's going to connect all of the smaller stories. And the focus means what is the theme? What is the idea? What are the few points that I want to make? The focus. Now, because every scene, or most every scene that we put together, should point to a very similar conclusion. It should focus on 1 or 2 or 3 ideas. Unless you want to write a book. You want to write a book? There's a lot of things you can accomplish. But if you want to write an article, 1,000, 2,000 words, whatever, if you have 3 or 4 scenes, they should all point in the same direction. Frame, overall story. Focus, overall theme. Sometimes there are parallel narratives. There are 2 stories instead of 1. And I'm going to skip through a couple of slides because my time is drawing to a close, and we want to kind of, maybe you want to ask some questions, but I want to show you how this all kind of plays out. Parallel narratives, sometimes there are more than 1 narrative. So if you can get 2 or 3 narratives coming together in one story, you've got 2 or 3, you've got a much better chance to keep your reader there. One more time I have to say, the readers are everything. The readers are why you're there. The readers are your connective tissue. The readers are how you're going to make an impact. The readers are how you're going to change the world. It's the readers, it ain't you, the writer, okay? So sometimes writing about one thing, so this comes from the New York Times. I wrote this piece, and it's writing about one thing to get to another. I went to see Carrie a week after her accident. Her shoulder had been broken, the bone shattered, and 24 stitches were needed to sew the cuts on her face. Her arm was in a sling. Her feet were propped on a pillow. A bottle of Vicodin was on a table with an easy reach. There's your story. What's at stake? What's going to happen to poor Carrie? But then the accident occurred on a week-long 325-mile bike ride. Carrie and 3 friends rode 141 miles of the Great Allegheny Passage from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, where the path joins blah, blah, blah. It was pouring, said Carrie. Back to the story. Suddenly, her wheels lost traction on the wet, slippery surface, and she felt the bike slip out from under her as she flew off the seat. And when she stood up, her face was bleeding profusely, and her shoulder throbbed with pain. Now, second story. If Carrie were writing about this experience, that incident when she hit the ground and bounced up, shaken and bleeding, could be her first scene. So, in fact, this 1,000-word, and you don't have to do this. People say, well, this is long form. I need 5,000 words to write narrative. No. You just need to work a little bit harder to write narrative short, okay? So this is, you know what Tom Wolfe said? Tom Wolfe said to an editor who wanted a short piece, and Tom Wolfe wanted to give him a longer piece. He said to this editor, look, man, I don't have time to write it short. And that's the fact. So sometimes we do these parallel narratives. We start with one subject that merges with another. So this is all, you can, I have more slides, but I don't want to show you more slides of this. But if you want to go to the New York Times, you can find it there. And you will see that lots of the things that I have told you today is in this article because I used Carrie as a reason to write about writing. I made that transition. Writing about one thing to get to another way to manipulate, or another way to trick, another way to make it easier for your reader to read the boring information that you want to give them, right? Okay, well, gee whiz. Oh, by the way, did I want to do that slide now? Let me think. No, I guess I will. I want to talk to you. There's my book. Lots of the things that I've said to you today are in this book. I'd be happy to if you ever want to use this book in your classes, I'd be happy to make connections with the teachers you work with, or with your, you always got to ask for a commercial. You always got to kind of say, hey, here I am. I'm waiting for you. So it's a good book and you'll like it, but so don't forget it when you assign books to your students and your teachers. But look, just writing about one thing to get to another. Okay, so it's a way to trick the reader. It's a way to kind of connect people, like people who deal with math curriculum, to writing. So what did I do? Law and order is what I did, right? I used law and order to maybe get you more involved in writing, okay? So I did my own parallel narrative. Now, there's nothing I didn't say to you, that I said to you about law and order that isn't true. My obsession is there, okay? I swear. Which kind of leads me to this, writing about one thing, get to another, and just leads me to this one final thing I want you to remember, because that's me. Could be you. This writing is so hard. Oh, you have no idea. Like, people say to me, oh, I think I can write a book. Well, yeah. Give me 12 years and maybe you'll be able to write a book if you work every single day. This is hard work, okay? And it's frustrating. Sometimes you think you're right there. You can get those, only one sentence, just one sentence will lead me forward, okay? And that sentence never comes. Every other sentence comes. And sometimes it comes at 3 a.m., And so I'm up. I'm pacing around, and maybe when you're writing, or your teachers are writing, your students are writing, they're going to be doing it too. And so look, this is you. Could be me. Could be you. But it's the middle of the night. You are trying like hell to finish this essay that you've written, or poem, or story. So this is, if you're really stuck, this is what I'm telling you need to do, especially now that we've shared this hour together. Get up. Get out of bed. Okay? Walk into your living room. Sit down on the sofa. Pick up the remote control. Switch it on to the 50 or 60 channels that have Law and Order reruns. Okay? And then sit and listen. Wait for the special sound that will make you focus and bring your attention forward and clear up your cloudy mind and get you to write that sentence. Wait for this writing prompt. And then start to write. So, want to ask a question? Or not? Okay? I could ask myself a question. I'll do anything, Vivian's paying me for 60 minutes, okay? So I think, what do I have here? 75, oh my God, okay. So I owe her 19 minutes. What am I going to do? I can go back and do the slides I didn't do. Okay, Vivian, Do I, can I get less money? So,
So I think you should use wait time because somebody will invariably have a question. Is this applicable? There we are. I have a comment.
oh, comment. I don't know.
wanted to know-
Yes.
I stood up and clapped your hands like this because you look fantastic. And
I like this comment. This,
you engaged us all. You know, I looked at the room and everyone was like smiling and jotting notes, and it's wonderful. And for me, I was telling my colleagues, I thought I have a writer's block for 13 years now, but you've inspired me.
oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Yes. Thank you. I truly love what I do. It's very exciting to do this and to talk to people. And I am the writer in residence, as Vivian said, in a science policy think tank. So I'm kind of trying to push the envelope. When I was the godfather behind creative nonfiction, I was just trying to get writers, poets, and fiction writers to kind of think that journalism, being a reporter, that like communicating information was not such a bad, embarrassing thing. At the University of Pittsburgh, they canceled the journalism program in the early 1960s because they thought it was too much like plumbing. I'm serious. So, you know, but now the world is different now. And so I'm trying to get you guys, people who deal, my son is a math major at Carnegie Mellon, and an incredible writer, okay? And he gets it. But I want people who don't think they're net writers to write because you have the gold. That's, I mean, honest to God, you have the gold that will change the world. And if you can't share it with the rest of us people, then where are we? There's this big barrier. There's this gap. Yes?
I'm revising the papers.
You're, okay, all right, okay.
Anyway, is this applicable to blogs?
To what?
This structure applicable to blogs, writing blogs?
It's applicable to absolutely everything. I mean, the good part about writing blogs is we are communicating around the world. We no longer have to pay $400 an hour to a shrink who will not. You know, we do it in our blogs, right? So the problem with blogs is usually people explode on their blogs. They don't edit themselves, let alone getting other people to edit. That's the problem. And so blogs often turn us off. But a good blog is absolutely terrific. But this is applicable. This works everywhere. Okay? It's just understanding what you're trying to communicate and understanding who you're trying to communicate to.
Yeah, I think it applies to now, too.
Yeah, indeed.
What's so striking to me is how different this is from our writing schools we taught in secondary schools. You know, oftentimes there is such an artificial and ideal division between genres. So in genre defining, giving too much credit, but you either write a narrative or you write research. There's no coming together of the two, and you know, it really, I think the talk for me as educator, when you think about why do we do that, and why do we think that somehow you have to master how to write a narrative, and then master how to write research, and then maybe in an advanced class in college you put those two together. When the truth is, mastering how to write a really dry research paper is probably, as academics, something maybe like 10 people read a piece.
Right, no.
Communicating to a much broader audience about the things you care about in your research. If we start talking about getting rid of kind of these artificial kind of notions of piece writing.
This is true. At Arizona State, the two groups that we're having trouble with are let us say, the PhD groups. Those academics who are afraid if they write narrative, they're not going to get tenure, because it won't count. And two, secondary school people as well. The teachers know know what they need to do to get to get through whatever their courses they're teaching. And this is kind of something new that gives students so much more freedom to write about their own world and to think about their own world. And it's challenging. Creative nonfiction, we're finally getting creative nonfiction into some curriculums, but it has not been easy because it's a new way to teach. It's a really new way to teach, and we're sending our readers, we're sending our students often out into the world to immerse themselves in order to learn and to write. From a PhD point of view, as I said, we're trying at Arizona State to get people to write narrative dissertations. And so I'm there, and a couple of other people are there, and it is really hard to get committee members. The students want it. It's the committee members we cannot get. So there's a great deal of resistance. But this is, here I am. And you know where I'm going to be next week. I'm going to talk to people who don't want to tell stories, these healthcare policy wonks from all over the world. And I'm going to talk to them similar to this about law and order, okay? And we're pushing the envelope. Things are changing. And we need people like you to make it change faster. But things are changing. Yeah.
So just related to that point, I was, and I sent this to you, but I just thought I'd tell other people. Just recently, I was doing a search for creative nonfiction, and there came up an article for students, for elementary students. I think it was geared towards third grade students about how to write creative nonfiction, and it mentioned your work as it should. But I think that what I find interesting about it is that people are trying to push it into classrooms, but sometimes our standards make it so that you can't. So ours, if you look at the Common Core, the Game Core, or anything related to the Common Core, it's like narrative is this, informational is this, and then, argument is this. And there's no sense that all of these things are part of a whole.
Hi.
So, building on Vivian's point, we've tried to write curriculum using Louder, please. We've tried to write some curriculum using articles by Gutkind and
Atul Gawande, who writes about medicine, yes.
And Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes.
Having kids in that look at this layering that you're talking about how narrative and information are interspersed. But I want to go back and look at that work though. But the other thing I was thinking is about exclusion. Like when you're writing academically, and you ever heard of a narrow audience, a broader audience isn't getting the information. And we've had this sort of line of social justice going through all of our speakers for the last 2 days, and this seems to tie into that as well. That when you write in such a way that it excludes a larger audience, how does that affect the empowerment of a larger audience to act, to respond to things that are happening in sciences, and I never thought about that aspect of it, and I think it's because of the series of talks that I've been sitting in, and we've been sitting in for the last 2 days. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think you pretty much said what ought to be said, that this way of thinking about writing is a way to include as many people as possible, and that's the whole idea. And there are, just because there are healthcare wonks or policy wonks or education wonks, whatever, that doesn't mean that they can't explain to the world. They should be able to explain to the world and show the world what they're trying to do. And, yes, well, absolutely, yes, yes. I mean, absolutely. I know that I'm going to make a lot of people mad next week. They don't want me. Half of those people don't want me there, but the other half really want me there. So that's it. But we're changing things, and people like Atul Gawande is brilliant, and he's a surgeon who wants to tell it like it is. And narrative medicine is one of the biggest things happening in the world of literature, a subgenre. Now, narrative medicine, Columbia alone has 4 full-time physicians, MDs, who are also full-time writers and writing this narrative nonfiction. And the whole idea, and most medical schools around the country have at least one narrative nonfiction or narrative medicine course. And the reason they do that is not because they want everyone to be Atul Gawandes. The reason they do that is because they have come to understand and to know that in order to tell a good, true story, you have to do something that young doctors have a very difficult time doing. They have to listen to their patients, because the patient's story equals about 80% of the diagnosis. The average time, right now, research shows the average time that physicians spend with their patients is 12 minutes, okay? So 12 minutes may not get that story out. And so by forcing students, medical students, to write, they're forcing them to learn how to listen and share what they know. Yeah?
You've been some inspiration to many of us in the room today for all kinds of different reasons. Would you care to share maybe who or what ideas have been inspiring to you?
I do a couple things that are really important to me. I love to write. Okay, I love it. And it's a great joy for me to sit down. I get up very early in the morning. I wasn't kidding. I had these 3 ventis today. I got up early in the morning and I write, and it's a time when I can make a connection with myself and with the rest of the world. But this rest of the world, to me, is really so important. And it's all part of this, what this creative nonfiction is, and what you can get your teachers and your students to think about. What I love so much is being in the writing world, but also creative nonfiction brings me out into the real world as well, and forces me to experience stuff I wouldn't ever have been able to experience without pushing myself, without saying to myself, you're going to write an essay about blah, blah, blah. And it forces me to do this embedded research. And so in the late 1980s, I began hanging around with, and this kind of changed everything for me, with a guy named Thomas Starzl, who is the liver transplant pioneer, still alive today, he's almost 90. And I spent 4 years in the organ transplant world. I probably, no kidding around, I probably have seen this close 300, 400 liver, heart, lung, kidney transplants, this close, and I have scrubbed in and helped from time to time. I really got involved, and I spent lots of time in transplant wards. I lived with some of the transplant candidates for a while. That kind of thing was awful because I lost lots of friends, lots of people that I was able to connect with. But it was also an incredible, impactful learning experience. It introduced an entire new world for me, okay? And this is what inspires me anytime I try to do this work, that they let me, people let you get involved. It's so amazing. People are lonely. We are lonely. We are isolated. We are islands. And then you have some guy like me who says, just let me hang out with you. Let me be with you. Let me hear what you think, okay? And then they don't understand that what I learned from them is 5 times more than they can ever get back from me. So, and this is what inspires me more than anything, this connection with other people. Now lately, since I've been in Arizona, I've had a chance to talk to people like you, more and more, everywhere. And this is also so exciting to me. So some of you groaned when, or some of you were impressed when Vivian said that I was the godfather behind, Vanity Fair called me the godfather behind creative nonfiction. What she didn't tell you is, he was laughing at me. He was roasting me. He was making fun of me. He ambushed me. He thought that was a riot. Ha, 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 the godfather behind creative nonfiction. And so, but he launched my life in some respect. He did. I had to turn it around a little bit. It took me about 48 hours to figure, he said mean things. And I'm walking up the street feeling really embarrassed, you know? And then people would say, hey, congratulations, Vanity Fair. And I thought, wait a minute. So it's been also, you know, I get inspired by just talking to you people and to people like you and trying to open up new things. So if I can write and experience and make connections with other people, what a life, huh? Yeah, what a life. Now, later on, if you want to hear about the negative parts of my life, I'll be happy to talk to you. But
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi.
It's not necessarily a question, but it's a realization I had when I was listening to you. That story, narrative, as the modus operandi of getting information through is an idea that we need to take as educators into our classrooms and into our professional development and use that as our method of getting our own information across to students and teachers. Even think about the parallel narratives structure, that there's more than one thing that we can get across at the same time, but also using story as the way to engage with our people, whether they're kids or adults. That it's very engaging, as Joy pointed out, that everyone was totally engaged with how you presented your information to us. And it's because of that narrative, I think we need to take that as a lesson in our own instruction.
That's terrific. Well, I am going to, thank you so much. I am going to be.
We have one more question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, first, thank you for your presentation. But
Sure.
I wanted to know how connected do you see your work to Daniel Pink's work around a whole new mind?
Would you say that again?
Daniel Pink's work, a whole new mind?
A whole new mind? I don't.
So Daniel Pink has this.
Oh, Daniel Pink, yes, okay.
When you start to speak toward how you're looking through the lens of, let's say, the medical field, and how they're getting students to be able to listen to their patients more, to diagnose their problems, and how to make them become better doctors and what have you. So Daniel Pink's work around a whole new mind also moves in that vein. So I just didn't know if you made any connections with his work and your work as well.
I have only heard of him, but I am not familiar with his work.
Okay.
But I think I should look into it.
I think a whole new mind is the book.
Okay.
And he wrote the book Drive.
Oh, okay. Terrific. Okay, well, look, I'm going to be around here for a couple more hours. I'll be around during lunch. I'd love to talk to you. I am available. I am the Godfather.